Buenos días, bienvenidos. My name is Monica Byrne Jimenez. I'm the Executive Director of UCEA. We're running a little behind schedule, so I'm just going to jump into the session. Rather than introducing each of these speakers, I'll have them introduce themselves in a minute. But one of the reasons we wanted to have this opportunity to talk to all the past directors of graduate student development and Jackson Scholars is because this is 2023 is the 20th anniversary of the Jackson Scholars, and it's been, and it's one of, probably UCA's most, I was going to say crowning moments. That sounds weird, though. But certainly something that has become embedded in the DNA of UCEA. It's a model that other organizations have reached out to me to ask about and talk about, and they see as a need within their own organizations. And so in every way, UCEA was ahead of the ball on creating this structured mentoring and support for students of color that were interested in going into the professoriate. And so we want to celebrate and be ready to celebrate the 20 years of Jackson Scholars next year, next convention. So I thought this would be a good time to sort of get and talk about what it took to have the Jackson Scholars. I think one of the things that is wonderful and really important for everybody to know is how the Jackson Scholars came to be. For many of us, and if you came in, if you are a Jackson Scholar even now, you would sort of assume the Jackson Scholars, like the Jackson Scholars have always been. But that process of creating this program, this network, has taken the work of many, many people over, 2 decades, more than 2 decades, 2.5 decades, to get to where we are now, that we're ready to celebrate, over 600 or 700 Jackson Scholar alum, new Jackson Scholar cohorts coming in every year, and the impact that has had in the organization, not just because of the Jackson Scholars themselves, but how the program brought in senior scholars for mentoring, how alumni have become deans. And so I think it's an important part of the recognition we want to do next year is to actually know about the beginnings of it. So we invited sort of past and current graduate student development associate directors to talk about how they put their brick into the wall, or into the pathway, not the wall, into the path of the Jackson Scholars. So I'm going to actually have them each introduce themselves. Maybe we'll kind of combine some of these questions about how you came to the work and what your brick was that you sort of put forward into it. So I will just start with Dr. Linda Tillman.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Tillman, a visiting professor at Loyola Marymount University. And thank you. So when we started Jackson Scholars, of course, we didn't have any idea what we were doing. But the emphasis was clearly on growing the professoriate in terms of diversity. When I first came to UCEA and in my doctoral studies, of course, if you had anybody, a black or Asian, Latinx, anybody other than a white professor, that was exceptional. I mean, very few of us, were in departments where we had any faculty of color. So our emphasis, I think, in the years that I was executive director was to encourage, urge, nudge, threaten department chairs into getting students of color as Jackson Scholars, talking to them, telling them about the importance of the program and building the network. Then the second thing was the help of the mentors was just exceptional. We had mentors stepping up. Everybody had a mentor. Some mentors had more than one. But we focused really clearly on what skill set did the scholars need to go into the professoriate if that was something they chose to do. So our first sessions were how to write a CV, how to do the job talk, what do you do when you then become a professor. So we would have professors, senior professors come and do these workshops at every UCEA. I was talking to Darius Prier last night, and he was saying that the most important thing for him when he was a Jackson Scholar was our special issue of QSE. So Jim Shurik, who is the editor of QSE, stepped up and said, I will sponsor a special issue because these people need to start learning how to write for academic publishing. And so Darius was saying, you just don't know how many doors that open. You don't know how that training helped to prepare people to be professors. So I think that that was something that really helped to launch the Jackson Scholars, was that we were providing very intense training, and Gerardo and I for sure were among the professors who did some of the training. And so that set the stage for the next director. If you were here back in the day, if there were 10 people of color at UCEA, not in the Jackson Scholars, but at UCEA, if there were 10 of us, that was a lot. If there were 10 people of color at UCEA, that was a lot. The Jackson Scholars increased 2,000% the number of people of color who come to UCEA, who go through this training, who engage in this encouragement, this community, this love, and then go on to become successful professors and UCEA presidents. So we have 2 Jackson Scholars, I think, who have become UCEA president, Noel Witherspoon at Ohio State, and now Dr. Lisa Bass. So I think we started our work well, and we're still doing our work well.
Is it on? Are we on? All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. All right, buenos dias. It's good to see you all. I'm always blessed to serve and blessed to be here. I stepped in the conversation right after Linda Tillman, and the amazing, great Linda Tillman. And and I was a grad rep out of headquarters at UCA when it was at UT Austin, and that kind of helped to align the conversation. I couldn't fill the shoes. You were amazing in the work, and so then I see myself, okay, what do we do to continue this work? So we started off with the workshops, but then I felt, no, we need to figure out a way to highlight the research work in a manner that not only supports the pathway, but also really provides an opportunity to either then be into the professor and be hired. And what we started doing was actually at UCEA, I think in Denver, we created sessions for Jackson Scholars to present the research on Thursday. Then I also did an extra move, actually rounded up a few current deans and said, I'd like to invite you to come and actually observe. And I remember Terrence Green dropping the mic on a few deans doing his presentation and did an incredible job. I mean, he set the place on fire. And that started a conversation among not just the rest of the Jackson Scholars and the deans, and as well as our colleagues, to then say, we need to do more of this and make sure that our students are presenting at UCEA, sharing that work, advancing the work, and more importantly, having the opportunity to share their work in a way that it will hopefully get them the opportunity for jobs, right, to join the professoriate. From that conversation, as we knew that we were onto something, I think other graduate students got a little jealous who were not Jackson Scholars. Said, well, we want to do the same thing. That really gave rise to the Graduate Student Council. Yeah. Once we have it, with this idea, like, we need to support the research work, that development work, put it in the center, and make sure we're supporting the scholarship of these amazing Jackson Scholars. And that evolved us to the next step. Because it is about the work we do. It is about advancing the work. At the end of the day, the academies, our trade and barter is our publications. And this is the research productivity that we carry. And if we can contribute to that step and that process, for us that's what we need to be, right? And I'm blessed that I was in the opportunity to have at least contributed that one thing. Moreover, it's fascinating to see where we are now and our numbers and the work that's being done and the advancement that's not just the folks that are representing in the academy from the Jackson Scholars, but it's the power of influence through their work that is being contributed that are transforming the academy. That's the power and value of the Jackson Scholars, right? It's back to the work we do and how it's connecting to our communities. So it's been really a blessing, and yeah, I'm excited to where we're headed after this.
By the time, am I on? It's on? By the time I stepped in as the director for the Jackson Scholars and Graduate Student Programming, a lot of the foundational work had already been set. And so for me, it was about trying to grow what Linda and Cristóbal had already put forth, trying to create more opportunities for in the publishing realm. We was like, if that was really successful, then how do we open that up? So approaching journal editors and making sure that there was more opportunities to create them. I think we created about 3 other publishing opportunities in that regard. And really kind of like, I think at that point there was, Angel, you were working with me, and Angel just was doing just wonderful work, just really organizing us, getting the numbers kind of like down, and we were able to see like our successes, but also areas that we really needed to develop even further. And I remember we would have these great conversations about, you know, what is it, how is it that we can have a bigger impact? And we started having conversations, I don't know if you remember, like Jackson Scholars 1.0 and 2.0, like how do we grow it to Jackson Scholars 2.0? Because it seemed as though Jackson Scholars 1.0 was about identifying folks who wanted to go directly into the professoriate right after graduation, but there was a group of individuals who might have wanted to go back into teaching and doing other administrative type of work, and then think about coming back to the professoriate. And so we were having really pointed discussions about that, and how to make that happen, and how to pay attention to the range of students that we were serving, because it had grown, as Linda said, exponentially. But I want to, so in terms of that, that's my brick, so to speak. But I want to kind of touch back in terms of how this started. Because I don't think that there's a lot of knowledge about that, and I did write about this. So if you will indulge me just a little bit, I will read out at least some of what I remember of how this started. I said when the Jackson Scholars Network was up for a vote by the UCEA plenum in October of 2003, it was a very tense and rigid discussion, one rife with apprehension, friction, uneasiness, and degrees of unspoken conflict. As someone who was present during that particular vote by the UCEA plenum, I can personally attest that the tension was quite thick. Plenum representatives were clearly torn between approving this initiative and the fiscal impact that it would have on their respective institutions. In fact, most plenum representatives expressed concerns strictly on the financial economic grounds and whether they can afford a institutional commitment of this nature. Other plenum members chimed in that they could not make an important decision of this nature until they conferred with their respective department chairs or their deans. Still others had reservations on the ground that their own educational leadership programs did not enroll enough graduate students of color. They were concerned that they would not only be required to locate these students, but that they would then be forced to fund them as Jackson Scholars. They actually said that. And more, I know. This prompted one plenum representative to declare that a program of this nature would ultimately impact program quality and excellence, especially if students of color selected into the program were not of high caliber or ability. Despite the fact that various plenum members pushed back against the age-old affirmative action trope surrounding race and quality, It began to look as though the Jackson Scholars Initiative would be defeated by vote that October. As the plenum engaged in heated discussion, something quite powerful happened, which I believe dramatically impacted the discussion and the final vote on that particular morning. It began when Judy Alston, I don't know if Judy's in the crowd, but it began when Judy Alston suddenly got up from her chair and walked to the back of the room as the conversation was heating up. One could sense the frustration and disgust she had as she got up from her chair that morning. We all noticed it. Immediately, I got up from my chair and I walked to the back of the room to check in on Judy. We were then joined by Michael Dantney and Linda Tillman, and about 2 minutes later, 2 members of the executive committee, Maria Luisa Gonzalez and Carla Murtada, also joined us. The 6 of us were clearly discouraged by the way the plenum conversation was shaping up, in part because we did not anticipate such strong reservations towards the Jackson Scholars Program. We think like, hey, this seemed like a good thing, and yet people were pushing against it. We began to strategize amongst ourselves about the possible next steps we needed to take if the plenum decided to vote down the proposal. Michael Dantney then asked us how we felt about pooling our money together and funding even one scholar. That's what he said. If we can fund just one scholar, not solely as a commitment to diversity, but also to symbolize the institution's failure to adequately respond to this particular issue. All of us instantly agreed to Michael's suggestion without hesitation or second thought. Clearly, the spectacle of having 6 people of color convene in the back of the room was a powerful image during that plenum meeting, particularly while the plenum was debating issues of race, quality, and diversity. Perhaps this is why the 6 of us were rather surprised when UCEA President Frank Koshin called for a vote. It turned out to be overwhelmingly positive. Perhaps some members of the plenum were intimidated by our actions. Perhaps others understood our frustration, or perhaps they were reminded of the long history and struggle of people of color in academia. Perhaps others simply needed an affirmation that they were making the right decision by voting in favor of the proposal that morning. But regardless of that particular reason, we all understood that something truly powerful had transpired that particular morning. It goes on. But this is just kind of my recollection of how this went down. It was not an easy vote. It wasn't like everybody was like, yeah, Jackson Scholars, let's make it happen. It was contested, it was controversial, and I'll put that in quotes. It really was looking like things weren't gonna go our way. But there was people who were committed, and that's what's important, an important message. There was a lot of people. Everybody up on the stage was committed. There's people out in the audience who were committed, and people who are still committed to making this thing happen. And so if there's anything that's a lesson for this, is we need to have that kind of commitment again. It's not just about signing up and saying, I want to be a mentor and checking off your box, you know, because we have a lot of that. I think I saw Kaula earlier today or yesterday with six scholars because their mentors didn't show up. So it's not just about kind of checking the box, folks. If we're going to have that commitment, we need to all step up to make this organization change, because otherwise it's just verbiage. And that's my 2 cents.
Okay. I thought I was going to hear the mic drop after that. But so I was in the second cohort of Jackson Scholars, so I'll speak from that perspective as well as my role as the AD for the time that I was with Holly Mackey. So as a Jackson Scholar, honestly, I don't remember UCEA before Jackson Scholars, so it's interesting, and thank you so much for your history lessons on that and how important history is. I think that's something we should all be aware of as scholars so that we're grateful for the opportunity. So Jackson Scholars changed my whole world in UCEA, not just because of the mentor that I had, but because of the network of scholars. Monica and Linda Tillman just talked about how people have gone on to do great, great things who were Jackson Scholars. Well, it's interesting when I'm in my classes, I can say, tell my students, those are my friends who wrote these articles. These are people that I know, that I can call on the phone or that I can email, and they will know who I am because of Jackson Scholars. Jackson Scholars not only brought more people to UCEA, but it brought us together. It gave us a safe place, a forum where we could talk, where we could learn, where we could just get revived when we felt, beaten down by our own institutions, by our programs. We could come there and recharge and then be reaffirmed by other scholars, senior scholars, junior scholars. But the main thing that, like I was saying, the people that I went through are doing great things. They taught us the appreciation of lateral relationships. They would say, yes, you can see us and you can read about us, but look to your left and look to the right because you guys are the next generation. So it really taught me an appreciation for the next generation. So years after being a scholar and I got my first job, a lot of that, again, was because of second and third job was because people knew my name because of Jackson Scholars, because of the opportunities that I had to be on programs. I can remember, Dr. Tillman asking me to do things, and I'm like, oh, why, of course I'll do that. But not knowing that every time my name was on the program, that was someone getting to know who I was, so that when I was up for jobs, people already knew, oh, that's Lisa Bass, And I'm grateful for that, and I don't take that for granted, and I don't take that as my own greatness, but just the opportunities. And that just goes to show how important the organization is to get our names out there and to give us such opportunities. So when I became the AD, I look at how many scholars that we've had. And so I thought about pulling the alum together. And so I worked on that and matching like people who were long-term alums with people who were new alums. And so they were, mentored a bit that way. It was very informal. It wasn't as formal as the Jackson Scholars program itself, but doing that and as well as continuing publication opportunities. And we also had a writing retreat. One of the things that Holly did, she's not here to speak for herself, so since it was, we were together, I'll speak for what she did, was bringing people together through webinars and online informal chats, which were especially helpful through COVID. She would just get the scholars together, and have conversations, check-ins, how are you, just making people feel welcomed and okay throughout the pandemic. So I'll be brief and say that was what, happened under my AD-ship. And Angel, she was also working with me as she was with Gerardo, and look at what she's doing now, great things.
Thank you. So I joined the Jackson Scholars Network. I believe so, yes, yeah. Jackson Scholars Network, UCEA headquarters, and my doc program journey all in the same day. So like Lisa, I've only known UCEA with Jackson Scholars being included because when I joined in 2014, they had just celebrated their 10th anniversary in 2013 under the leadership, under headquarters at UVA, but also the graduate student at the time was Carmen Foster, who handed over Jackson Scholars to me as the graduate research assistant in that time. And I knew Carmen from home, from Richmond. She had known me a good portion of my life and made me aware of the opportunity as she gently pushed me into my doc journey to say this is a program that is powerful and you would be able to learn from it, contribute to it, and take it to the next level in your graduate student research role. So I joined with Gerardo as the new AD, and to his credit and to Michelle Young's credit, who was executive director of headquarters at the time, they really gave me agency to make more of Jackson Scholars once I learned the ropes and take it to the next level with their support and leadership. So I was really grateful for that because that was something that I wasn't expecting as a part of my graduate student journey. I just thought I would do what I was told to do essentially because I was a doctoral student, but they said, no, we want to see you, take this to the next level and make leadership opportunities for it. So what I took that responsibility to do was to get to know the graduate students who are a part of it because I recognize I could empathize with their journey. We were in it together. And so I really tapped into the power of the network across the student perspective. As the first year and second year scholars, I understood what they were going through and tried to build a network across the country prior to the pandemic, but relying on our virtual engagement and interaction. And as I grew, into my third and fourth year, I was a scholar my second and third year. And by my fourth year, I started to realize, like Lisa said, that my peers were the next generation. I took that responsibility very seriously as well and began to tap to the early alums. So when Gerardo, Lisa, and Holly said, who should we have on these panels, I was starting to call on the people who I knew who had just graduated and needed that exposure in their early years of their junior faculty role. So I was starting to call on people who I had met and who were a few years ahead of me to say, you need to be front and center, because our responsibility as junior faculty will be to encourage the next group of graduate students in the Jackson Scholars engagement here at UCEA and at AERA. So to that, we added the option to have the feedback sessions after the research presentations, because we wanted them to have time to talk to their faculty mentors with even more intentionality to make sure they got individualized attention to get feedback on their dissertation topics that they had presented in the research symposium. We added the webinars, that was Holly's idea, and supported the idea that Lisa had to create an alumni, so that was becoming the 2.0 that Gerardo had planted the seeds for. So to be able to see all of that begin to come to fruition over the years that I was involved as a graduate student was really impactful, because we often feel like we are sewing into the academy, into education, and I feel like a way that it looks like it will take a long time for what we're studying, what we're researching, what we're writing about to really make impact. But I saw the impact in 4 years, and so I felt like we could really make strides if we continued with this level of commitment to the network. So when I became a junior faculty, I didn't go away. They couldn't get rid of me. So I continued, even though I wasn't a graduate student. I mentored Danny Moraguez, who was the next GRA for Jackson Scholars, to help and support Lisa and Holly. And then when the opportunity became available and Monica invited me to become an AD, of course I said yes before she could finish the question, because I was already there and being a part of it. I had never gone away, because I believed in the students that we were creating opportunities for so much that I would do, whatever it took, and take more time than I knew the days had to, continue to support the network, and have continued to do so during my junior faculty time.
Thank you all so much, not just for the hard work you've been doing for the past 20 years, but the care that you take even now with our scholars. Gerardo, you've already talked about sort of the challenges of early Jackson Scholars, and how, scholars of color, senior scholars of color came together and made it happen. I'd love to hear from you all what some current challenges are from the program perspective, and what do you see as sort of challenges that might be in the future that we might want to start considering now?
I think one that Gerardo said is we still need the commitment. So if we have 6, Jackson Scholars and their mentors aren't here, or we didn't have enough mentors, I don't know which one was the case, I think that ought to be a point of work for us, that we establish some kind of, who needs to be on another committee, but a committee that we are making sure that we actually have enough mentors who can be a mentor, because some people will sign up and then they don't do it, and then we're scrambling around trying to find the Jackson Scholar mentor. So I think we need to make sure that we still have mentors who are committed to being a Jackson Scholar mentor, and I think we need to make sure that each institution is sending us Jackson Scholars. I remember when we first started, I was always on the phone with these department chairs about why don't we have a Jackson Scholar from your university. There's someone there who you can send to us. So, I think those two things. We still need enough mentors. We need the commitment. We don't need to get lax in that area, and we still need to make sure that the institutions, send us at least one Jackson Scholar from their institution.
I would add to that the consistency of funding from these institutions to put their money where their mouth is and support scholars fully in their trek and to come to UCEA and ARA. We have a memorandum of understanding that includes a minimum amount, but we recognize as travel costs more post-pandemic, it is necessary to support students who are on all types of budgets, based on their financial situation, their funding from their institutions. And I know institutions that spend more money on their flowers than they do graduate students, to put it lightly. And I think there should be more intentionality and commitment and follow through to really support graduate students in their travels and their attendance to our two, important times to be together in person, because that can't be, the power of that can't be underspoken. It needs to be something that they have the opportunity to do. So similarly, if you say as an institution you support your students, you support the establishment of DEI initiatives and all of that goes along with it, it needs to include funding for students to be able to attend.
I think we need to continue this thread of thinking of how we advance the professoriate to be a more inclusive space, but also to continue to inform and influence the work that needs to be done. Right? And so when I think about, in my time as the associate director, I come across a number of Jackson Scholars who had done great work, phenomenal work, and were presenting and sharing their work, but also going into a more and more competitive market of opportunities against others. And that, for me, was always hard, because I remember writing letters after letters after letters for some great Jackson Scholars. Eventually, some of them have gotten the opportunity, but it spoke to, it's gotten more competitive. It's gone to this reality where coming out of a program, you need to have your name on a publication, you need to have some grant experience, and be able to hit the ground running. Given that, the next kind of line of thinking is also, how can we also mentor and support the work of our early career faculty of color who need to be recognized for the work that we take on, right? Not just from the work we're supposed to be doing in the classroom and teaching and the writing, but knowing that in our own spaces and institutions and organizations, we're often tapped to do additional work. We're often tapped by our communities because we're few in our institutions. We're often tapped by students who are not our own, or students across other colleges as well, who see us as that beacon. So I think there's some conversations that we think about as to how we can provide more tools, to provide the support, the resources in that next step, right? And how can we do that as an organization? I know we've talked about, recognizing one of my greatest mentors, femtors, is both Pedro Reyes and Malu Gonzalez, former presidents of UCEA and the first presidents of color of UCEA. And we've talked about their mentoring is often also playing out in that early career level. So how do we continue to grow the Jackson Scholars Network to ensure we are now creating these next generation of scholars who are now in mentoring positions themselves, who are now entering positions of influence as department chairs, who can then continue to grow, and that's that sphere of influence that's slowly growing and growing even more. I think we need to be strategic in that regard. I think we can do it. And what does that look like? I think we can move those steps, but we're there. We have a great fascinating list of Jackson Scholars now who are faculty, who are going into dean positions, right? We need to keep growing, yeah.
there is no doubt that over the past 20 years, we've made great advancements in getting more people of color, students of color, to come to UCEA. It's a wonderful accomplishment. I think a lot of, I'm not sure if it's 2,000% or more. But when it started off with like 2,000% is not a lot. Think about that. And that's the thing. I think that after 20 years, we've made some great advancements, but then we have every freaking right to celebrate. Amen. But let's not take our foot off the gas. Pause, celebrate, hug each other, and then say the struggle continues. Because this isn't the end. A lot of us, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And if we even look at the numbers for Jackson Scholars, at least when I was under the majority, we've gotten a lot of people to come through our programs, to attend UCEA, but many of them are not returning to faculty roles. And or if they are, they're not returning to faculty roles in UCEA institutions. So there's going to be other issues that we deal with, because then what does the professor look like at that point, right? And also, we've got to think about representation onto executive committee, president, etc. Get more people involved. Not just kind of like, yeah, it's wonderful that we're here now, but how do we now move up this kind of ladder, so to speak, from all walks of life, so that UCEA can actually represent the constituents that it serves out in the field, the people we purport to serve. Otherwise, it's just talk. And I think that it's important for us to kind of look at that and also be very critical. I'm glad that UCEA is doing the self-analysis and doing that self-assessment and looking internally and trying to figure out where those gaps are. Because there's a lot of gaps that still remain. And there's a lot of constituents that aren't represented at the table. My Native American brothers and sisters, no representation. Susan Faircloth called us out. What are we doing? There's no Latinx representation on the executive committee now. What are we doing? We've got to make sure that if we're going to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard, we've got to do that critical work of looking inward, pushing each other, supporting each other, so that we can push this organization to be what we all know it can be.
I don't know how I have to keep going after Gerardo, but
We'll make you go first.
But to that, I would say a lot of it's due to institutional inequality, some of the issues that we face. Because I think back to when I was a Jackson Scholar, and I've said this before, I look at the people who were from non-R1s and then the people who were from R1s, and I see our experiences are vastly different. So if somehow we could program into Jackson Scholars or UCEA in general opportunities for other people to close those gaps, because I remember being in a room with, peers, and the person who was from the non-R1, she was like, well, look at all of you. You guys will have opportunities that I'll never have. And I look around and she's not around anymore. I don't know what happened to her, but she's not the only one, who's a Jackson Scholar, who's from a non-R1, who does not get that institutional support, whose program does not expect you to come out with 3 publications or 6 publications. The mentors for students who are in that kind of, those institutions, we need to be mindful of that and to make sure that those students get even more support to make sure that we make those students as competitive as our scholars who come out of R1s.
Yeah, I think, these are conversations that are happening within that Jackson Scholars at the executive committee level around, issues of mentoring commitment and also the question of how has Jackson Scholars impacted mentors. Because being a part of that program can be a very powerful experience for established scholars as much as for students. I know the issues of funding are becoming even more and more important as you sort of said, right? As budgets are retrenching and it's graduate student versus early career faculty. And so there are sort of institutional things that are happening back at universities that we need to be prepared for and navigate as they continue to emerge and put pressure on graduate students, and particularly graduate students of color. So I appreciate all that. I think it's something I wanted to quickly sort of ask you all about too is higher ed's changing. I don't know if it's evolving, but it's certainly changing because the business model of higher ed was challenged during COVID. And I'm not exactly sure, and COVID continues. I don't want to pretend like COVID is done, right? So universities are being stretched and being forced to respond in ways that they weren't designed to do. And so your thoughts on, what is our role as UCEA? What's our role as people who support and care for Jackson Scholars in shaping the way that higher ed evolves, perhaps? And that's a big question and might be outside the scope of what the Jackson Scholars in particular, but you think about, we have prepared Jackson Scholars for Model X, but higher ed, and you alluded to that, Cristóbal, higher ed is moving towards Y. So in what ways do we need to prepare our Jackson Scholars to be ready for X, Y, or potentially even A? Because higher ed is in flux right now. And maybe there's no answer to that, and that would be okay.
So how does Jackson Scholars change the world? Is that what you
That's exactly, you said it so much more elegantly. Thank you, Angel. I think mine's on.
So one thing is all of this constant and more constant talk about DEI and increasing the diversity in universities of all types. So, I mean, that's a huge discussion all the time. Every other article in Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle is about the diversity issue. And so I think that Jackson Scholars is poised to stand in their face and say, okay, you said you wanted to increase the diversity in all types of institutions. We got them. Now let's see what you're going to do with the people that we have trained. And so I think, it wouldn't be me, but I think some of these people who are deans and executive directors and the like, and who now work in the White House, can get in touch with some of these people and say, we have a program that meets your requirement of increasing the diversity of faculty and administrators in all types of higher ed institutions. We have the model. So if you want help with increasing diversity in this changing world of higher ed, we've got the model. Let's sit down and talk about this. We got the model. We got 20 years of the model. We got 20 years of people that we can put out there as examples. We got 20 years of mentors. We got everything. We got the model. So if higher ed is evolving or changing and DEI continues to be one of their buzzwords, then let's talk about that, because we can help you with that. We can help you with that.
Yes, I think we had started, by getting the alum together. I think we have so many scholars in so many places. If we were to mobilize, I don't think that's an overstatement, Angel. I believe we could change the world. We have some powerful scholars out there. So if we would not just keep our hands on the pulse of what's going on, but actually mobilize to tell them this is the next step, I think that that's a possibility. And you were talking about our model. I don't know if you all know, but McNair Scholars, they sent someone here to our conference, and I spoke with her. Do you remember Mary? I can't remember her last name, but anyway, she came and she met with me about Jackson Scholars. She asked about every aspect of the program, how we do how we do our mentoring, our training, and all of that. And she just contacted me just before the conference and said, we just had our first cohort, and it's very successful. Thank you for what you taught us about Jackson Scholars. So the model is being looked at, and the model does work, and it's not just with our organization, now it's with another.
I do think that, as much as I talked about Jackson Scholars 2.0, I think there needs to be like even a 3.0, and the 3.0 is, like once we get you, like into the professoriate, once you get your foot in the door, then we've got to get you like promoted and tenured. And once we get you promoted and tenured, there's got to be mentorship to get you to be an administrator, higher ed admin, to think about deans, to think about provosts, to think about presidents. Because if higher ed is going to change and we're not at the table, then we're always going to be subjects of the change, not agents of the change. So if we want to be leading that discussion, then we've got to be able to continue the work. That's why I said the work doesn't stop by just getting you all in the door and mentoring you. The work has to be a whole career between now and beyond, so that we can have that effect on higher education and change the world.
I represent an institution that is monstrous. Right? We have 160,000 degree-seeking students. Much of that is online. We have another 250,000 learners learning from ASU, from elementary school, high school, through beyond certificates, and we're growing. Our mantra, our charter, is about measuring ourselves not by who we exclude, but by who we include and how they succeed. And I find that very powerfully important to the kind of work that we're all trying to set out. I say this as an idea of where we're headed as a field or as higher ed, but also in my pathway, my undergraduate degree and master's degrees was at an HSI. I went back to this HSI, New Mexico State University, as an assistant professor for 5 years. It was also critically important for me, and part of my pathway, because of my time of doing this work, I then went to Howard University for 7 blessed years, just recently joined ASU. The work that our MSIs are doing is critically important because per capita, they're doing more work than your PWIs. They're carrying the weight. Part of the conversations that we're trying to drive nationally is, okay, what commitments is higher ed making to ensure, given the need and the demand for more diverse faculty, what does that look like to actually make that happen? There's a need. We have to do better. And that means, what does that look like for us to partner with our MSIs strategically, right? And to ensure that we are represented for the communities we serve, right? Because it goes back to that original civil rights argument. We need to have faculty that look like and speak like the communities we serve. You talk about disparity amongst K-12 educators, it is a whole other level in higher ed. So how do we begin to transform higher ed, as you're saying? How do we become part of the solutions? And so I think there's some things we can do, recognizing the good work and the rich connections to communities that MSIs are doing. I think there's something also about ensuring in all institutions of higher ed that there also a sense of expectation, to go back to that original civil rights argument, that faculty should look like and speak like the communities they serve as well. And we need to advocate for that. It's not just having that conversation. We need to fight for that, right? We need to be in those spaces, because sadly, there's still huge disparities when you look at the entire higher ed system. And we have a great starting point with the Jackson Scholars. But I think we also should be thinking about, well, how do we recruit more HBCUs to the table? How do we recruit more MSIs, more HSIs, more tribal colleges to the table as well, so that we can be part of the solution strategically in that next phase?
So the motto for the network is Jackson Scholars Finish. And the legacy that is involved in that motto includes the day that I mentioned that I joined all three at the same time, was the AER rate before I even started my doc program, and it also happened to be the recognition of Dr. Tillman's retirement. And so it was a retirement with quotes, air quotes. And so what had been set before me by all of the amazing leadership, the legacy of Dr. Barbara Jackson, the legacy of the starting of the scholars who committed so fervently to establishing the network and seeing it through for the 10 years prior and the 10 years since then, is not captured. I think we know it as a community, but it's not captured in a place that others in higher ed and in the world can learn from it. So I think all the greatness, the brilliance, the commitment, the success of all of the scholars who have gone on to do great things both in the academy and out hasn't been captured in a way that can be an example. Like, we should not hold the power of the network in UCEA and not let the world know about it. Forgive me if it's a misquote, but there's some type of saying that says what gets measured gets done. So we need to begin to retroactively measure and capture what has been done in the network, and then from this 20-year mark forward, be more intentional about capturing quantitatively and qualitatively what goes on in the network in a way that can be used as an example more presently and intentionally to those who can learn from it, in a way that we can then use that to hold policymakers accountable at institutions, and leaders accountable at institutions to support students coming through with a snapshot that lives off of the pages and outside of the third week in November, at convention. So that's what I would say we can do to change the world.
And I love this idea of Jackson Scholars Finish, but then Jackson Scholars Finish and change the world. I think that's our new motto, Angel. We have a teeny tiny minutes left, so I wanted to give an opportunity to anyone out in the audience who might have a question. It's not often that we get these amazing people all on the same dais. So if anyone has a question, I know we're all like, we're not telling you not to, we just can't see you. I know I don't see any hands.
Oh, there's one right
Okay. I mean, you're going to have to come up a little. Can you come up or something? Because I can't.
Hi, I just had a question as a Ford Fellow and going through the notification that the Ford Fellowship is being dismantled and what that means for that community. Just wondering about the future-proofing for Jackson Scholars and how to put that maybe into the intentionality and making sure that it can continue for whoever needs it. I know the Ford Fellowship has been, or the folks in the Ford Fellows have been having conversations about what could have been in terms of measurement and all these things you're talking about. So just wondering about that. Thanks.
Anybody have a connection to Mackenzie Scott? Get a couple of millions, billions, right? You know, I think this is an important question because it wasn't, you know, there are other fellowships, the Gates Millennium Scholars Program, which has been critical. We have colleagues who have been extremely successful because of such programs. So that investment they're critically important. You know, I think one, we need to think about partnerships that we don't have. Partnerships in the sense of not just for the idea of fundraising, but partnerships that can help us be strategic at all levels, not just in the private sector, but also in the federal sector. And investing some time and effort to be able to set things in motion that can strengthen, right, institutionalize, that can think about what policies are we creating to ensure that we're institutionalizing efforts like this, concepts and programs like this. We have to, right? Because politically, nationally, we're getting pushback. We see that. We already know affirmative action is on the brink. Who knows what's going to happen, but we got an idea what's going to happen. What does that mean for us in our institutions, for us in the work we do in this field? We have to push back. We have to be strategic. We have to work in solidarity, because at the end of the day, we're all facing the same system of oppression. Yes, it plays out uniquely, historically, acknowledge that, but it's the same system of division. So we have to put some extra effort. We have to be strategic in our partnerships. I think there's a whole new fight for us.
And I think it needs to be a permanent budgetary line item in addition to partnerships. Just needs to be UCEA.
Yeah, I mean, I think that money is important. I don't want to diminish that. But, you know, I also, you know, like, you don't future-proof on soft money. You see? You future-proof with commitment. You future-proof with people, with buy-in. You future-proof because you believe in something, and it's so ingrained that you're not going to let, you know, come hell or high water, it's not going to go anywhere. So I want us to kind of while money is important and funding is important, the commitment, you know, and the buy-in is what's going to be important. That's what's going to carry this forward. And that's, you know, if there's any message that you know that I can give to folks, it's that, you know. And you know, I just look around the room and I'm like, it's empty. It's empty. And that's another, like, again, I'm not calling out my colleagues who are not here. They may have other places to go and other things to do. But for me, that's just another symbolic representation of the fragility of the commitment that we have to something so important like the Jackson Scholars. This room should be freaking packed, and it's a shame that it's not.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. I have a question. As we all know, that we have Jackson Scholar alum who are still K through 12 practitioners, are published, are still involved in action research. So when we talk about mentorship, I'd like to re-ask this question in terms of the opportunities for the K through 12 practitioners who are Jackson Scholar alum to serve as mentors for our Jackson Scholars.
So are you, there she go. Oh, so are you saying people who are in K-12 but still would like to publish still need mentoring? Is that?
How they can mentor.
For example, myself, K-12 practitioner, Jackson Scholar alum, published, still involved in action research, but I would love to give back to Jackson Scholars as a mentor, and I don't know if that is a possibility moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Because, of course, yeah, perfectly reasonable to me that we could, you know, try to go back and look through our, I was on a panel discussion with a Jackson Scholar who was in the first group, and I didn't know what had happened to her, but she's still in K-12, and she is published, but I never thought about asking her to come back and be a mentor. So I think that's a really important point, that we need to jump on that, to sort of go back through our list, find out who's in K-12 and who would be willing to also serve as mentors for, because not all of you, not all the scholars do go on to the professoriate for a number of reasons. So I think that's a great idea, because we got plenty.
And one changing aspect of higher ed is that more and more programs and institutions are hiring and depending on adjunct part-time faculty. I think these are ideal people who we can partner with and also be part of these strategic conversations as well. But it also means that our own institutions addressing that conversation of like, who's that one person making the decisions on such opportunities, 'cause that's also another room of inequity. But I think we need to be strategic with that effort there, and really including them in the academic spaces as adjunct faculty or partnerships, especially if we're to partner with K-12 districts and schools in our leadership development preparation as well.
We are at time, so if you could just help me in thanking our panelists. To head out of those points, I do hope you go back out and tell your colleagues what they missed, because this is an important part of who we are, and it's a very important part of who we want to continue becoming. And so I think, even this last question, thank you so much for that. It's like I was thinking, okay, there's the beginning of Jackson Scholars 3.0. And how do we continue to, in the Jackson Scholars, be as inclusive as possible of both current scholars, potential scholars, and alum. I think yesterday the EC was having a conversation, or the other day, about do we want to be an organization that impacts the 115 members of UCEA, or are we an organization that wants to do 115 plus? And I think that the Jackson Scholars is one of those efforts that allows us to be the 115 plus. So thank you again for everything. Please, we're going to be trying to do some programming between now and next convention to keep this conversation going, and then we can have a big, huge party in Minneapolis. So thank you again for coming. Enjoy the rest of your convention, y muchas gracias to our panelists.
I was just going to say I'd be willing to serve on a committee to, are you going to have Jackson Scholar things?